Have you raided Scarlet Enclave every single week and you only have one tier piece to show for it? Is your guild on the cusp of implosion because nobody can get gear? Or does SoD feel like an underpaid second job? So you spend hours coordinating strategies, prepping, farming consumes. For this? The core problem is that players are putting in significant effort on difficult bosses, but the loot drops feel very sparse. Many players, they still haven't finished a second tier piece, and they're getting gear only from the weekly quest. Others are dealing with a very big issue. The raid is tuned for 30 or more players, but the loot is only tuned for 20. For guilds that have cleared 8 out of 8 with 20 players every single week, this phase might just feel like heaven. Ashbringers completed tier sets, destroying bosses like Calderon in one shot. But for the rest of us, we're living on a completely different planet in terms of loot. It's not just about individual frustration though. This loot drought is really tearing guilds apart. It starts with the progression stall. You can't gear up members fast enough to beat the harder bosses. The intentional design was that max gear really wouldn't help you. You need Scarlet Enclave gear to progress in Scarlet Enclave. Outside of that time-gated tier token slice you get every week, there's absolutely no other way in the game to get Enclave level gear. There's no dungeon source, no BOEs on the auction house. So if you haven't been clearing most of the bosses the first weeks, 4 weeks into the raid, that is a big deal breaker for a lot of players, and they'll end up quitting your guild entirely. As people quit, you're going to end up having to fill 40 players with a lot of pugs, especially if you want desirable classes like the Boomkins, the Pharaohs, the Warlocks. That means you're going to have to give a lot of loot to outsiders, and those outsiders, they come to a raid once and they're never seen again. That means lower morale and really no progress made for the next week. Even the non-pugs in your raid, they really turn over at an absurdly high rate in Phase 8. Many high-end WoW players, they climb the corporate ladder by guild hopping whenever they see better opportunities. When we stalled on progression, the first guy we gave our ATS for, he left the very next day. Then the people we gave tier sets to, they also left. They just didn't want to put up with PUGing. For the members that do stay though, there's going to be a lot of internal tension. Lost rules feel so much worse whenever the loot is rare. The people left in your guild, they build up resentment and your guild starts getting drama too. It's hard to blame people either. Imagine how you'd feel seeing a guy with 6-piece tier and Ashbringer and you've only got 1 piece of loot. Also, how would you feel about pressing the like button if you spent hours in Scarlet Enclave barely getting loot, or subscribing if you want more hot takes on WoW? So then with the lack of progression, the turnover of pugs, the internal tension, the grind starts to feel very unrewarding, leading players to take breaks or quit entirely. I have seen so many guilds stop raiding because the expectations were, by the end of 4 weeks, surely we'll have cleared the raid. Unfortunately, they're still stuck PUGing, and they aren't even close to getting their best gear. Some players are feeling this intense, mechanics-heavy, low-reward loop. It's not really the Classic Plus they signed up for. Instead, it's a lot closer to retail. Solastraza would feel right at home as a heroic Cataclysm fight, or a retail raid boss even. Lily and Voss, meanwhile, might as well have been directly ported from the most recent retail raid. Having to do retail fights in Classic is already a deal breaker for a lot of people, but then you couple in the fact there's no quality of life. We don't have mass res, our consumables are expensive, the pulls per hour we do compared to retail are very slow. Ultimately, the Classic community is not really set up for this kind of progression. Getting people to do a second raid night is really like pulling teeth. It feels so different than the Phase 1 that so many of us loved. They were basically able to just completely reimagine dungeons as raids that felt still very much like Classic. They weren't complete cakewalks either, there were definitely challenges. We all remember the dust-to-dust situation, but everybody was getting loot, everybody was making progress. If you were to do a public poll about which phase people enjoyed more, Phase 1 or Phase 8, I would bet a lot of gold on which phase people would prefer. So with the loot scarcity issues, I really want to do a deep dive into how specs are actually performing. Classes in Phase 8, they're really tuned around having full bis gear. We all suspected players finishing their 2-piece tier 3.5 would really change the landscape of DPS dealers. The Red Paladin 2-piece alone is worth over 1500 damage versus pre-bis gear. Meanwhile, warriors gain over 800 DPS from their 2-piece, and up to 3 times that on cleave. So how does that actually translate though to playing the game? Well, for me, I really don't feel 1500 damage stronger with my 2-set, but the data tells a different story. Looking at the high-end performers on Warcraft logs, the 95th percentile, Red Paladins have made a very significant leap. Over the past 7 days, top Reds have been averaging almost 8200 DPS across the raid. Compare that to the average over the last 2 weeks, only about 8,000. That is a very noticeable jump in actual damage output on the top end. It's an improvement that also gave them the second largest positive swing in their performance score. Think of that like ranking points compared to all the other DPS specs. Meanwhile, Fury Warriors, at least in the 20-man only data, they had a similar jump, about 7,600 DPS all the way to 7,900 DPS. The data definitely confirms it. Ret Paladins and Fury Warriors, at least those getting their tier sets faster than the 20-mans, they're not just doing more damage, they're also climbing the performance ladder almost faster than anybody else right now. The new legendary Corrupted Ashbringers also just beginning to come into play for DPS rankings. A lot of high-end guilds are finishing up their first Ashbringer this week. Expect huge number increases for melee soon, as my ret without changing a single thing will go up over 2,000 DPS. Meanwhile, Two-Handed Fury is going to go up over 1,800 DPS, and melee hunters will gain 1,500. Left out of the Ashbringer dreams, but also rising quickly, the Rogues. Their performance score improvements were the 5th and 7th highest. Zooming out to 40-man as well, you can see 2 Rogue specs in the top 5 individual boss rankings. I expect both specs to really continue to trend upwards. The other major mover was Fire Mages. They moved up nearly 200 DPS in 20-mans and had the 6th highest performance score increase. Not every class is having a great time though, as the data from 20-man shows us a concerning trend for Shadow Priests, Affliction Warlocks, Feral Druids. Shadow Priests are used to coming out of the gate really fast and carrying progression, only to feel barely noticeable improvements with their new gear. Then for Warlocks, the problem is likely due to their recent Shadowbolt Volley nerf. That really affects fights like Reborn Council, for example. And while Ferals might be the most desirable addition to any raid, their gear and their DPS really haven't changed much in the last weeks. That's likely because the meta is to keep your old gear until you have a full 6 set. So what classes are really owning right now? Well, the Shadow Priests, the Affliction Locks, the Balance Druids are still the kings of progression. But it's clear that classes like Warriors, Paladins, Hunters are tuned to do obscene damage with full biz. In some ways, it's like Phase 8 is a play with 2 acts. Act 1 is the caster DPS carrying progression. Then Act 2, the Rets, the Fury Warriors, the Hunters, the Rogues, the Fire Mages, destroying the damage meters. Still, don't expect to get an easy raid spot on a Ret Paladin. I tried for 3 hours last night and couldn't find a single group. So what's the verdict? Is the Scarlet Enclave loot system killing the vibe for average guilds in SoD's final phase? I think so myself, and the comments really do suggest a very widespread problem. So are you experiencing this loot famine? Has your guild felt the strain as well? Share your story respectfully in the comments below. Let's talk about how this phase really feels for the majority of players. Thanks for watching, and remember there's still time to subscribe so I can give Mom the ultimate Mother's Day present and move out of her basement. Also, if you want to kill the true hardest boss in Classic WoW, check out my Kansu guide next.